You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to On the Way Home. I'm your host, Emmy Kelly. Today, we're diving into a conversation that's timely, complex, and deeply important for those of us working in housing and homelessness across Canada. I'm joined by two incredible guests, Jacob Gorenkoff, CEO and founder of Homeward Public Affairs, and Kimberley Meijer, a consultant with a powerful track record of translating data into strategy and impact. Both Jake and Kim are trusted voices in housing policy, systems change, and frontline advocacy, and they're here to help us unpack the opportunities and challenges in Canada's evolving housing landscape. Let's jump in. Thank you both, Jake and Kim, for joining me on the way home today. To start each episode, we always ask our guests, what does home mean to you? Kim, you've never been on the show yet. Let's start with you.
Well, wonderful.
Then, Jake, you go next.
Wonderful. Thanks, Emmy. I think for me, it's going to kind of sound a little corny, but home for me is less of it's not a singular place, but really a sense of community. So it's where my loved ones are. It's where I feel the safest, where I feel the most at peace at home. So, it can be in the family home. It can be, I've had it in the past. It was, my university library. So it's just, I think anywhere that you feel you're most yourself, you're most safe. So that's what home means to me.
No, that's such a great answer, Kim. And Emmy, it's so nice to be back on the podcast. I got used to having a much balder host before, but this is a nice change. I think for me, what I would say is home is a place of safety and it's a place of comfort. It's a place where you can be with the people that you care about and where you can learn, where you can grow. And at the same time, as that being what home is, it also tells you what homelessness also is. It's the absence of those things, the absence of safety and comfort and belonging. And it's something that we, our team at Homeward, myself and Kim, are very committed to helping end, because everybody deserves a chance to experience the joys and the benefits that a home brings.
Maybe that's a perfect segue for you both to tell me and our listeners a little bit about Homeward, what you're setting out to do as an organization and what you're planning to achieve. I think you've teased it right there in your opening, Jake, but tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll jump in first. We built Homeward, or are currently building Homeward, on a simple belief, and it's really that everybody deserves the opportunity to build a great life for themselves. We partner with First Nations, with housing leaders, with mission-driven organizations, groups like Blue Door, which we're so thrilled that we get to continue to work with, to really make that belief real. To help these organizations and communities secure funding to advance positive policy change and build systems that serve people better than the ones that we currently have. We do that through three pillars: advocacy, advisory, and communications. Sometimes that means helping a group like Blue Door navigate government, which honestly, I think anybody that has tried to navigate government can agree that it often feels like a labyrinth and it's difficult to figure out where to go and when and who to speak to and when. Other times it means helping design a new program or telling a story that helps decision makers see the human impact behind the numbers. What I think personally, as the founder of Homeward, that really sets us apart is how we work. And Emmy, I hope you can attest to this because we've been working with you for almost 2 years, is, we truly believe in trying to walk beside our clients. We try to lead with integrity, with respect and care. We try to really listen intently to make sure that we understand you, the work you're doing. We try to act with urgency because the work that you're doing is urgent. And we want to be with you until we actually get the positive outcomes. That's what I would say in a nutshell. I know, Kim, you've been with us for a while now, helping deliver on a lot of that. So you definitely have some good insight into how we work as well.
Yeah, I think, I chalk it up to this idea of we aren't working siloed. We're working hand in hand, side by side with you, or with any organization. And it's this ability to take our expertise and your expertise and mesh that together, and really be able to put forward the ideas and the policy ideas that you're trying to take over the finish line. And so we're just, a piece that assists with that, and that really helps you to get in the room with elected officials to show, hey, we know how you could achieve these goals that you have, and here's how we will help you along with that. And so I think that's how, at least that's how I see our work through Homeward, and in supporting all the clients that we support.
There's definitely a lot going on in the housing space right now, in terms of like a lot of people innovating and trying to come up with solutions, some good, some not as good, and then the government as well taking some actions. And so, I'm interested, well, let's dial that back for a minute. Build Canada Homes. Let's talk about that. It's being positioned as a cornerstone of the federal government's new housing strategy. Could you share with us what you both see as the real opportunities and blind spots in this initiative for homelessness and housing leaders?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I just had a good conversation with the housing minister's office about this on Friday, so maybe I'll start and then Kim can jump in. Build Canada Homes really takes its cue from what the government of Canada did back in 1945, when CMHC was created to house returning veterans and their families. Back then, provinces and municipalities weren't really involved in the housing game. So Ottawa just really stepped in and built, and we can still see the results today in communities across Canada with all of those little victory homes. You fast forward 80 years later to today in 2025, housing now involves every level of government. So if you're a group like, you're like yours, Emmy, Blue Door being in York Region, you're dealing with the government of Canada, you're dealing with the government of Ontario, you're dealing with the regional municipality of York, and you're dealing with the lower tier municipalities like Newmarket or Aurora. So that is a very complex system to be navigating with 4 levels of government being involved with housing delivery. And that's why it's become so slow. What I would say about BCH in particular, Build Canada Homes, is it's really the biggest and most ambitious federal intervention since the Second World War in housing in particular. The opportunity right now is the agency is still very much being shaped. Like they of course launched it back in the middle of September, but that was really just like the very early stages of what they want to do with it. So there's a lot of opportunity for you as Blue Door or anybody that is really listening to this podcast to be able to influence what it could become. I would also say that the choice of CEO is fantastic. Anna Bailau is somebody with very deep municipal housing experience. She was the deputy mayor of Toronto, of course. And she also was involved in developing affordable housing with Dream. So somebody who really has a commitment to the space. And overall, that gives the sector a real chance to help design the institution that we're going to be working with for at least a generation, but probably if it's more like CMHC, multiple generations. In terms of like a blind spot that we also have, like anything with government or any sort of new opportunity in general, it's that the people that are designing it don't always know what it takes to make projects succeed on the ground. They need the insight of people like yourself, Emmy, like other people that listen to this podcast, to really help them figure out how to make things work so that they are practical and reflect the realities on the ground. I think I'll stop there because I'm kind of rhapsodizing at this point. Kim, I think you should.
Sure. I think one of the things that we think about with Build Canada Homes is like, echoing what Jacob said, is it is still such a new entity. The government is still kind of figuring it out as they plan it out. And so I think it's a blind spot, but also an opportunity where they don't know directionally fully where they want to take this. And so, I think it's a great window for Blue Door, and other experts and organizations to come in and say, here's what we know, here's what we've been doing on the ground, here's how we can help you to succeed, how we can help the government to, fulfill their goals and actually get the housing that Canadians need. And so I think that's a really great opportunity to kind of go in on the ground with BCH, and to really kind of see where is their thinking at in this moment, but also where do they hope to take this process, right? They're talking about funding for supportive housing. They're talking about funding for Indigenous housing. They're talking about funding for deeply affordable housing. They are looking at market versus non-market. So there's a lot of things that are on the go for them that I think really gives a lot of opportunity and lends credence to a lot of groups that want to come in and have some form of influence on this process.
Mm-hmm. And if I could just jump in and add one other thing that I neglected to say earlier, and I think it really resonates with exactly what Kim just said as well. One of the lessons that I learned that has really stuck with me when I was learning how to be an effective advocate is that the most effective advocates are the ones that can do government's homework for them. If you can go and talk to the minister or to his staff or to officials and literally hand them solutions that are drawn from lived experience of understanding how to achieve the outcomes that you want, you're not just helping them, you're literally helping the country get housing and everything we're doing around building it right.
I'm going to ask, because there are so many solutions, and just in line with what you said about do the homework and show up, how does Homeward, and if you do, how do you sift through, maybe like, do you take on the work of any organization that wants you to work with them, or like how do you sift through, I don't want to say the noise, but there's obviously a lot going on in the housing sector, and it's probably a lot also for government to hear from like many organizations with needs and communicating their angle and everything like that. How would you select and ensure that government is actually like that their job is made easier through the work that you do, that you're actually like sifting out to get something concrete that they can push forward? Or does that not? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
No, that's a good question, actually. I like that. I think overall, in terms of like who we work with, like if we can both truly say that the work you are doing is making your community better, we want to work with you. In terms of what that looks like practically, in terms of working with government on something like Build Canada Homes as an example, like let's take the conversation I had Friday over coffee with the minister's office as an example. We talked about all of the things that our clients are doing around housing, anything applicable to BCH, and we listen actively and intently to figure out like what are the most pressing things that they're trying to figure out in that moment or within the next couple weeks, and almost act like an emergency room surgeon and triage it for them and listen to what they need to figure out, and basically position our clients as the ones that are going to be helping them figure those things out. So as an example, one of the things that's a really high priority for them right now is supporting Indigenous organizations or communities in directly supporting the goals of Build Canada Homes, to get municipalities to more effectively and actively change rules and regulations so that we can build more and more effectively. How we can better use Crown-owned land to build affordable housing, things like that. So in terms of sifting through, it's almost more like triaging, which is I know kind of a funny answer, but that's definitely how I would describe it. And I think I answered your question, Emmy?
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, Kim, did you want to add anything on to that?
I think you kind of stressed it really well, Jacob, and I think it's actually a good analogy to look at it as kind of an emergency triage, and I think in some respects, because everybody's kind of building the plane as they go kind of thing. I think that triaging and seeing, okay, where is the top priority in this moment? Where can we kind of punt other pieces down the road? I think that's kind of where this process is at. And I think the beauty of it is it's an iterative process. So there's going to be pieces that build up as it goes, and the foundations, you start to build that together now. So I think that's a great analogy to kind of look at this.
Jake, you've had experience in navigating billion housing wins, how do you see the role of CMHC and housing infrastructure in Communities Canada evolving under this shifting federal agenda? Do you feel this is a rebranding of existing tools, or are we entering a new era of public sector housing delivery?
I love this question. No, I think that's great. And honestly, we're not just seeing a rebranding. We're watching the architecture, so to speak, of federal housing delivery being rewritten in real time. We're entering a very, very different environment than we've had for the last decade or so. When the government of Canada under Prime Minister Trudeau launched the National Housing Strategy back in 2017, it was a very important re-entry of the federal government into housing policy and program delivery, but it was really just a first step. It was a way for the government to kind of get back in to the game, to kind of get its ducks in a row, and they did it by delivering everything through CMHC. But I mean, as you can attest, the challenge is that CMHC by design is a mortgage underwriting corporation. The culture is one built around risk mitigation rather than around actually getting affordable housing built. That's not a criticism. I really do think that they did the best they could with the tools they had and the culture and everything that they had built up since 1945. But that's basically just how the organization evolved. And over time, it became increasingly clear that programs were often too cautious, too slow, or too complex. Like I remember at one point, I think it was in 2020, I had just recently started working at the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, and they were launching over 200 changes to the National Housing Co-Investment Fund to make it easier to use. That over 200 changes, like you shouldn't need to make over 200 changes to anything. You shouldn't need to make minor tweaks, right? So it just kind of goes to show the difficulty, the overly complex nature of some of these things, and a need to do things differently. The creation of Build Canada Homes is a signal that need was recognized, that we needed a fundamentally different delivery model. And the intention, I can tell everybody with certainty, is that BCH is supposed to be the federal government's new lead agency for all things non-market housing. And CMHC is going to be refocused nearly entirely, not entirely, but they're going to be refocused on market-based housing and financial instruments. HICC, or as I like to call it, HIC, which I know the government of Canada does not like, but they came up with the acronym, so I think they kind of have to wear that one, is currently incubating Build Canada Homes. So BCH is basically housed within the department right now, and as it grows, it will become its own agency. HICC is going to basically, or most likely, retain some of that broader policy oversight, things like infrastructure linkages, managing a lot of the transfers to provinces and territories, and aligning things across departments so that it's easier for the government to coordinate. I think, I'm using a lot of government babble right now, so maybe just to kind of simplify it, like more practically, that means that a lot of the tools and the programs that the sector relies on, like the Affordable Housing Fund, is going to transition under BCH. That will definitely be coming. So for advocates and sector leaders, anybody that's engaging with government and making use of those programs, it means you need to really build relationships in three directions. You need to stay connected with CMHC as it refocuses. You need to engage with the housing minister's team as often as possible. And you need to get to know the leadership forming inside of BCH. The timing of this is all relatively uncertain. They're saying it's going to happen soon, but soon for government can sometimes mean a year or two. So it's important to start the ball rolling now. But all that to say, I think 2026 is going to be a very pivotal and defining year for federal housing policy and program delivery.
Kim, we'll go to you for a minute because your work is very much about taking complex data, stories, narratives, turning them into a persuasive persuasive narrative. How do you think that organizations should be communicating their value right now to position themselves within this changing federal landscape? And maybe I'm thinking specifically, nonprofits and charities who want to be part of the solution in terms of building housing, and maybe how that has not I think sometimes the sector is not always viewed as a vehicle for that much traction or change quickly in housing. Can you share a little bit from your perspective how organizations can frame themselves?
Yeah, and I think this is such a great question to really think about. And I think on the point of nonprofits in particular, so personally having a background coming from that world when I started my career, one of the things a lot of organizations really are trying to do is move beyond just the fundraising side of being a nonprofit, and really move into this advocacy sphere. And some have a long history of this, and others are just trying to kind of dip their feet into this and really build that out. And so I think, the first thing I always say when I'm talking with, with people on this is know your expertise, like know what you're an expert in, understand what policy areas you have great focus on. So if it's youth homelessness, or if it's affordable housing for seniors, or if it's indigenous housing, anything like that, I think really understanding what you're an expert on in that, and that you have a voice within the sector, that you have a level of credibility in that is the first step. And then I think, looking at, okay, what are success stories that you have as an organization on these issues? Where have you built programs, in a localized setting that allow you to show the government, hey, this is what we've done. This is how we've been successful. This is where we can come in and help you. It's like Jake said earlier, there is this idea that government really likes it if you can come to the table with projects that are both executable, but also have some level of success that you can prove to them. See, we've done this before and it works. So I think that's one way that I would say you really want to build your narrative. And then, pepper in important statistics, show lived experiences, how that all feeds into the narrative and into the issue, and how you as an organization can solve this issue, or at least be part of the solution. I think that's the best way I would say you kind of get yourself into the room, and really be able to kind of explain to government, you have the problem, we have the solution, and here's how we can be part of that.
And you've both worked closely with frontline and policy organizations. What are you hearing from them about this moment? Are people feeling energized by the commitments? Are they anxious about the gaps that can happen between announcements? Are they concerned that about the change and the impacts?
Yeah, I think it's a little mix of everything. I think depending on who you talk to, some folks are super energized for this. Like, it's like, okay, finally we have some momentum. We've been kind of yelling this from the rooftop for a number of years, like something needs to be done. And I think the collaborative nature of BCH in working with provinces, territories, and municipalities is so key. And I think that's something that a lot of organizations have said, kudos government, you're stepping up with this. And I think there are other groups that are a little more reserved, like there's a level of excitement, but also what does that mean for us going forward? When will we see, more measures that talk about supportive housing, for example, or that talk about deeply affordable, talk about non-market? Like, I think, the cogs of government tend to move slower than I think society as a whole would like it to go. And so I think it's tempering expectations in some respects that we're starting to see play out.
Yeah, I mean, change is exciting, and then at the same time there's always growing pains, right? But overall it does seem like we're getting some good traction in the direction we want housing to go. So because you're in policy work, let's turn to Ontario Bills 6, 10, 17, and 25 for a minute. Maybe share with us what your read is on how these laws are reshaping the power dynamics between province, municipalities, and service providers.
Kim, do you want to
Sure,
get first
sure.
crack at that one?
I think, the real big thing is, so 3 of the 4 of these have received royal assent, so they are officially law now. The 4th one being the Emergency Management Act, that's still within, I think, second reading last I checked. So that one is still kind of within committee process, but the other 3 are law, and essentially I think they're all just, measures that through a more conservative lens take on approaches to better or to shift the narrative around public safety in terms of a couple of them, and then as well looking at really cutting red tape for home building as a whole for one of the other main policies. And so I think it's really just understanding how these policies will affect municipalities and how organizations that feed into these practices, how they are affected by these policies. And I think it's a bit of a static process where everybody's kind of trying to understand where they fit into this as we go. And I think, just kind of seeing, okay, now these are law. How do we maintain our work while also being within the scope of these legal entities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Kim's take on this is really solid, and I'm very lucky that I get to work with her on a daily basis and hear everything she has to say. When I think about these laws, I think when you take them in tandem, whether they've received royal assent or they're very likely to, because for the Premier Ford has a majority government, so it's pretty much guaranteed that if they decide to continue to push the legislation, it will become law. The bills really mark a shift in how power flows in the housing and policy or social policy system within Ontario. We've been seeing over the past few years that the provincial government is gradually pulling more authority upward or centralizing it away from municipalities and local governments. And I would say that these 4 laws together take that to a new level. Bills 6 and Bill 10 move the province deeper into enforcement territory, giving police, bylaw officers, and even landlords greater powers that directly affect vulnerable Ontarians. Bill 17 limits municipal autonomy over land use planning and inclusionary zoning. Bill 25 lets the province issue binding directives to social service agencies in what they describe as extraordinary circumstances, but don't really define it quite well. So that could be very broad, could give a lot of authority to bind these agencies, including Blue Door, to do things that they decide should be done. When you add all of that together, you get a governance model that is a lot more centralized, where Queen's Park is dictating the rules, and municipalities, not-for-profits, housing providers are expected to follow orders with less flexibility to tailor solutions locally. And you know what's happening on the ground far better than a government that is much more detached or removed from things. That creates real risks because you're not able to actually tailor things as well to the populations that you're supposed to be serving. You are the ones, like Blue Door and other organizations, you know which encampments are being managed humanely, you know which developments are shovel ready, you know which supports actually keep people housed. The government of Ontario doesn't know that quite as well as you do, and so that doesn't really make sense to be doing something like this. At the same time, I really don't think that the intent was malicious with these bills. I think that the province genuinely wants more coordination and faster delivery, but they're taking the wrong levers to get there. Instead of trying to build trust and capacity with local governments and with organizations like Blue Door and others, they're trying to legislate their way to collaboration, which really doesn't make any sense. So my overall read is this. It's really Ontario is entering what I would describe as a period of command and control policymaking. The smart move for municipalities and service providers and organizations who are trying to work with people, vulnerable people that are directly impacted by this legislation or pieces of legislation, is to really double down on coalition building where you can, and double down on evidence-based advocacy. Work together, present unified data, make it easier whenever possible for the province to say yes and to see your perspective on things. If you can show that cooperation is able to yield better outcomes than control, the pendulum will ultimately swing back towards partnership. And that's actually what we need to ensure that housing gets built and that people are kept stably housed.
Kim, were you going to add more there, or are we good on
No,
that?
I think Jake summed it up quite well. So yeah, I
love
that
that
with him.
part about collaboration and understanding that the intent of everyone is to do well. We've talked before on this podcast about how policy can either protect or punish. Well, I think you kind of summed up the piece of the bills. Do you feel that there's more to add there on any nuances in the environment that's being created, either intentionally or unintentionally?
Yeah, I think so. I think just to emphasize, there are a couple things actually. I think to start, it's important to emphasize something that I think is really important. I really truly believe that most, if not all, of the people in the government of Ontario who helped craft these bills are really trying to make Ontario a better place. But the reality is there are huge gaps in understanding about the impacts that the laws will have on the most vulnerable people here, right? It's very negative, the outcomes that are going to happen. And, sector leaders are right to be upset about these bills. But I don't think that it comes from a place of malice or negative intent. I think it comes from a lack of understanding. And when policy is written in isolation from the lived experience of the people that it affects, it leads to very severe blind spots. And these bills taken together are examples of that. I think the bills generally, and one of the things that are really terrible about them is that they're punishing vulnerability instead of addressing the root causes of it. And that is really problematic. They're asking landlords, many of whom are nonprofit or supportive housing providers that are doing incredible work helping very vulnerable people. They're asking them to act as enforcers and informants. They're basically turning them into extensions of the policing system. And that's incredibly misguided and counterproductive to what we want to accomplish. I think that it is really important for sector leaders to advocate, to ensure that there aren't missed conversations, that we're reaching the right ears at the right time. It really, these are examples of why advocacy really, really matters. Like Homeward, between myself and Kim and the rest of our team, we have relationships with people within the government of Ontario that we can work with listeners of this podcast to leverage so that we can make these changes happen. If we don't, and we don't, work collectively to try to combat this, there is going to be continued harm done to these vulnerable people. And in order to help them, we need people to step up and start saying that this isn't working and presenting solutions that will.
Kim, with your background in election communications and advocacy, how should organizations be adjusting their messaging in this more centralized policy climate? What's the smartest way to influence change?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great question, and it's something that some folks really intuitively understand, and some I think you need to kind of work with a little more. I think it's actually a good sign to be in a more centralized system because you're not dealing with polarities, you're not dealing with really left thinking or really right thinking. You're kind of in the center, which is where a lot of people, a lot of voters tend to be. And so I think creating messaging that will appeal to a liberal government or will appeal to a conservative government that kind of sits in the middle is great. So language that looks at affordability. Both sides talk about affordability, so that's something you can lean into. Cost of living. language surrounding that, language around housing and affordability, language around community safety, things like that, where it will appeal to both sides. You just might tailor your language a little bit based on who you're talking to. But generally you can kind of keep it a little more broad based, a little more generic in some ways, because you can kind of, see where the ideology or the like legislative agenda of a government is going. And sometimes too you might see political communications come out where they talk about like lowering crime, or dealing with the cost of rising grocery prices or whatever you might see. And it's just understanding that they're trying to attach to the same issue just through a different lens. And so I think if you go in a pragmatic kind of way, and understand that the people that you're talking to want to come to a similar solution that you do, it's just the way that they get there is going to be a little different. But I think having really specific generic style language that is simple enough to follow, easy enough for anybody to kind of digest, is probably the best foot forward that you can kind of have with this. That would be my kind of first step on advice.
Can I ask you both, at Homeward, would you say there's like a specific policy or set of policies that you're targeting that you would feel like, if we could make change here, we would have really moved the needle?
That's a very broad question, Emmy. I think, like with anything, there's never a silver bullet to any issue. So like there's not like one thing we would want to be looking at. But I think in terms of like focus areas, housing is such a significant one, because really, if you think about it, everything starts at home. Like if you don't have a safe and secure place to live, you can't be a productive member of society or the economy, right? Which is so pivotal. But if you wanted us to get into like the nitty gritty of certain things related to housing policy change, like as an example, and like one thing that you're doing with Blue Door, Emmy, which I think is amazing, is through the Housing for All Land Trust, and looking at how we can better leverage Crown land to build affordable housing. Like that is something that is so needed. And it's crazy. If you look at the land mass that we have in Canada, we're one of the biggest countries in the world, and yet we have such a significant housing shortage. It really like baffles me. Like it's baffling. There is no way that this should be an issue, and yet it is, right? So that's one thing that we need to look at. There are so many other things that we could be talking about, but I think that that's a good example. Kim, do you want to add anything to that?
I think for me, it's looking at, policy doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't occur overnight. It's this idea of pushing the boulder up the hill. Like it's so incremental at times. Most times you don't feel like you're making much of a difference when the needle moves really slow. But I think for every incremental shift you have, it's a ripple effect. Like you're gonna see it play out in other policy areas. So, to kind of build on Jacob's point about housing as policy, another thing, Blue Door is doing really spectacular work on is workforce development with the Construct program, right? And so that feeds into, okay, you're addressing the housing piece as well as addressing the workforce shortage that is feeding into the inability to construct new homes. And so I think, there is this idea that you can have multiple policy items on the go with government, and you can actually kind of create a through line with that, where you're like, okay, well, in order to have affordable housing, we need the workforce to get there. In order to have the workforce, we need to have the people trained. And so I think that's another way to look at it, is it's not just a one policy measure. It's not within a vacuum. Like there are multiple players within this that need to come to the table. And so I think that's how you can also look at it, is it's incremental, but it's incremental in different places. And so, yeah.
I think you started giving some good advice there. And before we end, if you could give one piece of advice to sector leaders that are listening in right now, navigating both a new federal and provincial landscape, what would it be?
I like that question. If you don't mind, Kim, I'll jump in first. I think like my advice is relatively simple. It's really know yourself. And I know that probably sounds a little silly, but the reality is, and like I have been learning this recently myself with what I want to do with Homeward is, oftentimes you have an idea of who you are and what you're doing, whether it's yourself personally or with the organization you're leading. But you don't really think about it as intently or as deeply or as critically as you could be. And it's important that you do that. You need to like really know who you're supporting, why you're doing it, how you go about it. Then you need to turn that self-knowledge into a very clear, confident message about your organization and yourself and what you stand for and what you really want to achieve. Right now, the sector is being shaped by two very different forces, particularly within Ontario, of course, in this context. One is positive with Build Canada Homes, opening new doors. The other is with these 4 bills with the government of Ontario, which are closing doors. Both moments demand leadership, and that means showing up with clarity and conviction. And you can really only do that effectively if you really know who you are, who your organization is, and what you're trying to do. So take the time to articulate that purpose, not just for your funders and your communities, but for yourself, because it will help you with what you're doing. And if you need support doing that, like I started Homeward to work with organizations like Blue Door, like the people that are listening to this podcast. We want to work with you. We want to help understand you. We understand the stakes. You understand the stakes. You're doing the hard work on the ground, and we want to be helping amplify your voice to reach the places where decisions are made. Anyway, that's what I would say. Kim.
Thanks. Yeah, I look at it, it's like 2 sides of coin. So know your limits, but also know your expertise. So we're human. We're not going to know everything. We know what we know. We know what we don't know. And so I think understanding both of those sides to your knowledge base are critical. I think engaging with people who understand certain issues better than you do, connect with them, utilize resources, collaborate and partner with them. And then on areas where you know what you have that knowledge and expertise, share that. Share that with other organizations or share that with government and like get in the room and say, listen, we know how this works. How can we help you? And I think that's a really key way for anybody to kind of build out not just, an advocacy plan, but also just like building out future processes for government relations or for community interactions and how to actually achieve these goals that everybody has. I think know your limits, know your expertise, and rely on both of them.
So if any of the listeners are feeling like they want to get in touch with either or both of you or reach out to Homeward for support with their work, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, you can visit our website, homewardpa.ca. Call us, email us. All of our contact information is on the website. We would love to chat with you about any of the work.
What does the PA stand for?
Public
Okay,
Affairs.
good.
It would just have been a really long URL otherwise,
Yeah.
Right?
Well, thank you both so much, Jake and Kim, for joining us and breaking down what policy shifts mean for the housing and homelessness sector. It means a lot to our listeners to get to tune in to different people sharing their perspectives. And you've taught us a lot today. There's a lot to look forward to and a lot of possibility. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Yeah,
Thank you for having us. We appreciate being here.
Take care. Jake, Kim, special thank you for joining us on the show today and for sharing such thoughtful insights on everything from Build Canada Homes to Ontario's shifting policy environment. It's clear we're in a moment of both risk and opportunity. We'll need to stay thoughtful, grounded, connected, and be bold in shaping what comes next. To our listeners, thanks for being with us on the way home. If you found this conversation helpful, be sure to subscribe, share, and join us again as we continue exploring the path toward ending homelessness in Canada. I'm Emmy Kelly, and until next time, take care.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.